S/4HANA ERP implementations are often notorious for becoming money pits, but they should be focused more on creating value for the organization. How do we do that? That's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And many of our clients are implementing S/4HANA as we speak. So we're involved with a lot of these different implementations. We're not affiliated with SAP or with S/4HANA, but we do have a lot of clients implementing it. And one thing we found is that so many of these projects struggle because of cost and complexity and risk and just change to the organization that it ends up becoming a project that gets out of control in terms of budget and time and that sort of thing. But instead of focusing on how do we ensure that this doesn't become a money pit, we've got to change our mindset into how do we create value for the organization and maximize our ROI and make sure we realize the benefits we should be getting from S/4HANA. So the question becomes, well, how do we do that? And that's what I want to talk about here today. Now, if you'd like to learn more about tech agnostic and objective ways to make your S/4HANA implementation more successful, I encourage you to download our free guide to S/4HANA implementations. You can find that by scanning the QR code right here or go to the links below. Now let's start with the basics of the ROI of value creation. Why is this concept of value creation so expensive? And the reason for that is because a lot of times organizations recognize the fact that 80% or more of SAP projects fail. In fact, 80% or more of any ERP project or digital transformation fails. So it's not just an SAP problem. But one of the things that we find is that organizations are so myopically focused on not failing that they almost myopically focus and obsessively focus with reducing time, reducing costs, controlling the project, things that are all important, but it misses the bigger picture of how are we actually going to get a good ROI out of this? How are we going to ensure that we're not investing too much money for functionality that we don't need? And how do we invest more time and money in functionality that's actually going to deliver more business value? And oftentimes we get bogged down with all the different complexities and functionality of S/4HANA and all the different things it can do, and we lose sight of that fact of how are we going to create actual business value. So that's the place to start, is to recognize that to look at the ROI means we have to look at the cost and the benefits and the overall business value of our S/4HANA implementation. And quite frankly, most organizations that go into S/4HANA implementations are focused on ROI when they first start, but something happens along the way when they get into the implementation to where things start to get more complicated and bogged down within the organization, so that people start worrying too much about time and implementation cost and not enough about long-term business value. And so what I want to do in the rest of this video is talk about how to accomplish those competing goals and priorities. Now let's start with what most people focus on when they're looking at the ROI of their S/4HANA implementation, and that is implementation cost. I think we all intuitively know that if we can minimize implementation cost, or at the very least make sure that the implementation costs don't balloon out of control, that's the denominator of your ROI calculation to figure out how much of a return we get on that investment. So if we spend too much money with not enough return, obviously that's not a positive ROI when you compare it to a lower cost, higher value implementation. So some of the things you can do to minimize costs in your implementation would be, first of all, to make sure that you're focused on functionality that delivers business value, and that you're not focused on functionality or modules or add-ons from SAP that don't deliver material ROI. And that's why doing a business case is so important up front. You want to really analyze not just an overarching S/4HANA implementation, but look at individual modules and functions, look at the cost benefit to ensure that you're not just buying a bunch of software for the heck of it, but that you're doing it because you know you're getting business value, and you're not doing it because you're pressured by a sales rep who's driven by commission. So one of the best things you can do to start is make sure that you have a realistic understanding of your implementation costs and that you've rationalized the implementation cost up front, so that you don't get surprised later on with too much complexity and too much cost that lowers and diminishes the ROI of your implementation. One of the most overlooked aspects of ROI, or return on investment, or value creation is what happens at the moment you go live with S/4HANA. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we focus on implementation cost, and we know how to manage that, or we at least think we know how to manage that. We understand it. And then we look at long-term business value, but what doesn't happen is organizations miss this really big risk and this big opportunity in the middle, which is what happens in those weeks or months right after go live. For example, if you go live with S/4HANA and you can't ship product for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, or you can't run payroll for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, what does that do to your organization? What does that cost? And the reason you need to understand that is because you have to quantify the risk and you have to figure out how are we going to minimize the risk, which, by the way, might require us to spend more on the implementation cost, which, of course, we're also trying to minimize implementation cost. But if we minimize implementation cost and just increase our operational disruption risk, that is not a good trade-off. And so we have to look at not just implementation cost, but what happens at the time of go-live, and how are we going to mitigate and make sure that we don't have customer impacts or employee impacts or payroll impacts, regulatory impacts, things that are negative in nature that might actually undermine the value creation of our organization. So those are some of the things to think about in terms of operational disruption and quantifying that and understanding that risk so that we can mitigate those things along the way. Now, the real money and the real ROI should come from long-term business value. If you do your project right and you focus on the right things, you implement the highest value functions within S/4HANA, you've minimized operational disruption, longer term, the value you get, the efficiency gains, the increases in revenue, and all the other advantages of implementing S/4HANA, that should be the real driver of ROI. However, most organizations stop at the time of go live, they stabilize the system, and they don't focus enough on that long-term business value, actually achieving that long-term business value. And if you think about it, when you've spent all this time and money on an implementation, why not spend a little bit more to really maximize and amp up some of those areas of business value? So one of the biggest things you can do here is quantify what your expected business benefits are, not just in terms of a business case that gets justification and then just gets thrown on a shelf after the approval for the project, but instead you use that same business case to quantify where you expect to get business benefits, how exactly you expect to get it, what functionality and capabilities within S/4HANA are going to deliver those areas of business value, and use that as a tracking mechanism going forward rather than just assuming we're done with the project because we've gone live. Now you may be wondering, how do we get this business value that you keep talking about, that long-term business value? I mentioned that one way to do that is to develop a business case and use that as a benefits realization or value creation tool to actually manage and track benefits over time. But I'll take it a step further here and talk about what should happen after go live. After go live of your first phase, instead of just jumping to the next phase or the next location of your rollout, I would suggest that you take some extra time to push off that next phase, to optimize and really fine tune what you've just gone live with, because that's where the real value is. And usually these are small fixes. Usually there's a lot of small little tweaks you can be making that can have a tremendous amount of value. It might be something as simple as retraining your people, doing some refresher training. It could be minor configurations that weren't set up right. Maybe it's not bringing your business to its knees, but it's leaving a lot of business value on the table because you haven't configured the software the way you could have. It could be that there's some integration issues or data issues. So there's a lot of things that you can be cleaning up that are pretty low cost but can have a tremendous amount of value. And if you spend the time and money to do that rather than just jumping to the next phase, you're really going to be able to maximize the ROI of your investment. Now, the other benefit of this approach of sort of deferring and pushing off your next phase of the project is that you can learn from what you just did. You can look at the mistakes you made and you can fine tune and improve the next phase. But if we rush to the next phase, we're going to make the same mistakes again. So we might as well spend the time to get it right, fine tune, optimize, learn, and maximize the ROI we get in that first phase. And then later phases of the project, we can get smarter and be better and get more ROI along the way. So one of the biggest things you can do is slow down and push off your next phase of the project and really optimize post-implementation to ensure that you're getting the business value. So I hope this has provided some guidance on how to get more value out of your S/4HANA implementation. If you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to download our Guide to S/4HANA Implementations. This is a tech-agnostic, realistic view of the world of how to manage these projects to make it successful. You can download that for free by scanning the QR code right here or go to the links below. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day.